Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Daryl, or Ladriz, for Power Ups Not Included and 2G1C and all of that good stuff. So last Tuesday, we recorded an episode of 2G1C, and the primary focus of the episode was supposed to be the upcoming MMO Wildstar. Now, last Tuesday was also my birthday. And if you listened to the show, you'd probably notice that I was pretty incoherent. And I felt that that episode did not do the game Wildstar justice, and it did not do our podcast justice. I'm not happy with the way that it turned out. So what I want to do here today is I'm going to try to give a little bit more detail and just try to give a better overview of what Wildstar is. Because I think Wildstar, it has the potential to be a really, really good game, and my overview of it was not good. It was not up to par, and I've actually been complaining at Tim all week about it, and I actually wanted to re-record the episode, but I think at this point it's kind of too late. This is Saturday, and we recorded it on Tuesday, so here we are, and I'm just going to go ahead and try to give a rundown of Wildstar. This shouldn't take too long. This isn't going to be a full podcast length recording, but we'll see how long it goes on. So, as I said, this is about Wildstar, and Wildstar is an MMO. It is being developed by Carbine Studios, who is just seems to be a bunch of guys who left other MMO teams. I mean, some of them are industry veterans. They've been around for 10, 15, 20 years, whatever, guys that have worked on games like, I guess, Dark Age of Camelot and some World of Warcraft guys from the old days. And they came together, and I think they started working on Wildstar back in 2005. And their goal, it seems to be that they're just trying to make a game as what they say is a game that they would enjoy. Really, it looks like it's turning out pretty well. I mean, no MMO is ever going to be perfect, but they're adding a lot of things to the MMO genre, trying to shake some things up. They're not just doing a straight World of Warcraft clone like a lot of other games have tried to do. Because I think at this point in the lifespan of that game and just sort of where we are at in the MMO world, as I mentioned on the podcast, everybody's already made up their mind on the World of Warcraft style. Either you like it or you don't. And there's players like myself and Tim who have played WoW. We played it a lot, and we don't want another WoW clone. We want a game that can include some elements of it, but they have to do something new. They have to innovate in some ways, and that's where I feel that Wildstar comes in. And as I also mentioned on the podcast, when I first saw Wildstar, I was reading an article at Rock Paper Shotgun. The picture in the article, it kind of just looked like a troll from World of Warcraft, and it was actually the Draken, sorry, or is it Draken, I'm not sure. But they're basically like blizzards and on two legs, more or less, and they have horns and tails. So I saw a picture of one of them, and it kind of looked really reminiscent of World of Warcraft style, and I just passed it over. I was like, yeah, this game, I don't even want to read about this WoW clone, and sort of brushed it off like a lot of people seem to do. But I went back to it. Something said, no, go back and take a look at it. And I'm really glad that I did. I think the first thing I saw for it was the housing video, which I will get to in a moment. But just a little background on what Wildstar, kind of the overall story is that there's this legendary planet in this galaxy, and it's called Nexus. Nexus is famous for, having treasure and, it's just kind of an uncharted planet. Everybody kind of wants a piece of what could potentially be on Nexus. So you've got your two factions in the game. You've got the Dominion and the Exiles. The Dominion kind of has the role of the bad guys, quote unquote. They just kind of want to conquer everything. They're this, big time interstellar, like, galactic empire of sorts. And then the Exiles are sort of the ragtag band of miscreants and mercenaries. They are kind of the good guys in the universe. So you've got it's really has a set kind of a good guy and bad guy thing going on. The races, they have some that you would expect. Each faction has a human race. There is a mechanical race. They're the Makari. They're on the Dominion side, and then I previously mentioned the Draken. Exiles have their humans. They have the Granok, which are like gigantic stone creatures, and then the Arin, which the ones that we've seen are kind of humanoid, but they have like big bunny ears and they have long tails. And I've read some rumors about them that they'll have other types of, not just bunny ears. They'll have other creatures that you can make when you make your class. And I don't know too much about that. They haven't really gone into a lot of detail. I don't even know if that's true. That's just something that I've read. And the fourth race for each faction has not been announced yet. There's some speculation that for the Dominion, it's called the Chua, I think is what it is. That isn't confirmed at all, so we don't really know, but supposedly that's like a small rodent. They call it on the Wildstar Junkies Nation website here, the small rodent or gremlin-like creatures. Each race will have specific classes that it can roll. I'm not going to run through all of them here. You can look at it on the Junkies Nation website for Wildstar yourself if you so desire, but it's going to be more like World of Warcraft was at its launch, where specific races will only be able to roll specific classes. And it looks like, at least from these 6, at least every race except for the Arin will be able to make a warrior. Now I'm sure down the road they'll open it up to more, but for now it's going to be very just specific classes per race. Your classes are pretty much standard MMO classes. You have your warrior, which is DPS and tanking, stalker, which is DPS and can also tank. Now, the stalker seems to be kind of the equivalent to their rogue. So it's going to do, like I said, your melee DPS and the tanking as well. And they haven't specified on whether or not that's going to be an off-tank, or if it's going to be able to step in situations in place of the warrior class. They have the Esper, which is a ranged DPS and healer. They have a Spell Slinger, which is also a ranged DPS and healer. And there are 2 unannounced classes. Now, the speculation on the classes is one of them is going to be a pure healing class, and the other one I've seen is going to be more of a DPS class. I think it's going to be another ranged DPS. From what I've seen, some people are talking about there being an engineering class, which is also could potentially be the pet class in the game, because from what I can understand, they haven't really talked a lot about pets in general, but I haven't seen anything about any of the classes that they've announced having a pet. So that's been some of the speculation, is that it will be a pet class. So moving on, they have, your stats are more or less your standard stats. There's really not a whole lot to talk about there. There's been some back and forth on whether or not you're going to be able to allocate your stats yourself when you level up. I read in a recent patch notes for the beta, since it is in closed beta right now, that I think they took that away. But, we'll see. I don't know. A lot of this stuff, and really everything that I'm talking about here is subject to change. I probably should have announced that at the beginning, but they better late than never. You're going to have your secondary attributes as well, which those, in addition to your you've got primary and secondary, but nothing really new about that. They haven't really talked a whole lot about that. I don't know there's some certain things like, there'll be MMO staples like hit rating, and I can't even think of what else there would be off the top of maybe dodge, or I think in Warcraft they had block rating, which I'm sure that would tie into your tanking classes as well. They have a feature called a milestone as well. So what a milestone would be is, let's say you get your strength up to, or I guess they call it brutality. Let's say you get it up to a certain point. Well, then you're going to be able to unlock something like a specific ability that you could only get by passing that milestone. So it allows for a little bit more customization depending on your play style. let's say if you were a DPS warrior and you did get your strength to a certain level, then you would get abilities that a warrior tank wouldn't have, or at least wouldn't have as early. That's pretty cool. I like the sound of that. And then apparently they will have hit rating as well. Don't really know a whole lot about that. That's something more that they seem to be focusing on at max level. So, one of the features that I'm most excited about, the two features I'm most excited about are paths and housing, and I'll get to housing probably right after paths. But so your paths, as I mentioned I spent a lot of time talking about this on the podcast, and this is something you're going to select when you make your character. So you'll have your race, your class, and then your path. And this is not something that currently you can change. It's just you set it and then that's it. So what it is there's certain types of content in the game, and let's say if you like to explore more. That's me. I like to explore, and I told a little story on the podcast about in World of Warcraft when I first started playing. I like to go to certain areas in the game that I had either read about or had done missions in Warcraft 2 and Warcraft 1 on. Just really explore the world that I had only seen from the top down. And you couldn't really get up close and personal on. That was something that really drew me into that game. So for me, the Explorer path is where I plan on going currently. And when you select your path, it just gives you more content in a specific style. Now, they have said that every character, no matter what path you pick, you're still going to get other content regardless. So even me as an explorer, I'm still going to get content that would be similar to what the other paths will experience, which the other paths are scientist, soldier, and settler. So for the scientist, that is it's more of studying the environment. So I kind of have been drawing an analogy to the Metroid Prime games, where one of the things you could do in that game is scan every creature, scan certain areas of the game, and that's kind of what I relate that to. I think it makes it easy for people to understand. And what that'll do is, let's say if you scan a computer, well, that could potentially open up another area to explore, or let's say it could trigger potentially an event where a laser cannon pops out of the middle of the floor, and now you can man the cannon and gun down a bunch of enemies, and you get extra rewards if you finish it within a certain time frame or what have you. So that's what the scientist is all about. The soldier is basically what it sounds like. You get to kill stuff. So there'll be more escort quests. You'll be able to... It gives you more quests as far as killing stronger enemies. Like maybe there will be named enemies that you'll have to go kill, and I think they're calling them assassination missions. And I think it ties into the public events as well. So let's say if you play a bigger role in a public event as far as killing a lot of enemies or something like that, that would be content that's more geared towards the soldier. The settler, what he does is it allows you to build your own outposts more or less. And so, like, let's say out in the middle of an area where there is no base, there aren't any buildings, no vendors, anything like that, the settler could potentially make a camp out there, set up a transportation hub, maybe, some vendors for things like potions and all of that sort of stuff. That's kind of what the settler seems to be. And you can also build onto other settlers' outposts, too, so that sounds pretty cool. Carbine claims that pathing is about 20 to 25% of your content. Now, you're going to get your pathing experience, which is different from your normal experience. Once you hit a certain amount, you'll gain new items, new rewards. The Wildstar Junkies website here uses the example of, for an explorer, you could get a jetpack or speed boots, and they'll obviously be on a little bit longer cooldown, but that could also tie into, let's say if there's an area where you have some trouble reaching, maybe your jetpack will help you reach that area more, which will give you even further rewards because you're exploring a special area of the map that you otherwise wouldn't normally be able to get to. Even for something like the settler, and this is my speculation, this is something I was thinking about earlier, is let's say if you reach a certain point with your settler path and it allows you to summon a special vendor for a certain amount of time at one of your buildings. So those are just some examples of the content we could possibly be looking forward to. As I said earlier, all this stuff is subject to change, but I think the pathing, this is something that they've built in the game from the ground up. So this isn't just some tacked on feature that, hey, we're 6 months from release and we just need more content. We need an excuse to have players play more. No, this is something that they've really integrated into the game that they're building from the ground up. I didn't really talk much about the Explorer path earlier, other than just saying that that's going to more than likely be my path that I'm going to choose, but it'll involve a lot of things like jumping puzzles. I use an example on the podcast of, like, let's say you discover an underground tunnel which takes you from potentially an entrance of an instance to the town, and there'll obviously be monsters and things like that underneath in that tunnel that you can fight. So it could just make it easy, could open up some paths to make traveling around maps easier. That's kind of what the Explorer is all about. So next, I'm going to go into the housing system. I touched on it a little bit on the podcast. It appears as though it's going to be instance-based. Now, there is some talk on the Wildstar forums, and there are no official Wildstar forums as of now. The closest thing is the Wildstar Central forums. One of the cool things about that forum, too, is the developers do post on there, so they have a lot of interaction with the community as well, which is really good. I don't want to get too far off topic of the housing system, but they will be instanced as of now. Basically, the way it works is you get a plot of land pretty early on in the game, and the Wildstar Junkies page says level 6. You get your plot of land. The first thing that you have to do with your land is you have to clear it off, because they're just giving you the land, and it could have monsters on it, and you'll probably need to clear out an area, possibly of trees or what have you. And you buy your house, and you start out with a small house, and then you go from there. They say it starts from a tent to a basic house into much larger houses, but we'll see. What they're doing is, I talked about this on the podcast as well, is they're going to have your sockets, which are just your empty plots, well, I guess not really your plots, but just your empty spaces on your land, where you can put things down like mines. You can use it. You can have a garden. You can have possibly other things as well. One of the cool things that they're doing with it is, also I mentioned on the podcast, so for example, in your mining nodes, you could potentially open up a small single-player instance that you can go into, and there might be a rare boss in there, or maybe even just some treasure chests or something like that you can open up. Also, for the raiders, possibly access to raid portals. That's something that's being debated as well, and I've seen a lot of people talking about saying they didn't like or whatever. But as of now, you do have raid portals on your housing plot. It also can provide buffs too. You do get increased rested experience inside your house, more so in your house than anywhere else in the game. And the more stuff you have in your house, the more rested experience you get. So there is a real incentive there to go out and get and seek out more stuff to put in your house. And they haven't really talked a whole lot about, at least from what I've seen, how you're going to get your doodads in your house, which will include your bed and lamps and dresser and all kinds of crazy crap, I'm sure. I'm sure they'll have disco balls and who the hell knows what else. But we can probably assume that it's going to come possibly from crafting, from questing, from even stuff I'm sure will drop out of instances. So you'll probably be getting a lot of stuff just through playing the game normally. I don't think you'll have to grind a lot to get stuff, but I think obviously it's going to be like anything else in an MMO, where if you want the highest rewards, you're really going to have to work for it, and I'm sure that will include raiding as well. So, also what you can do is you can open your housing area to the public, to just your friends, or you can just keep it to yourself if you're an introvert. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but you do have the option there if you want, that you can have it be a social thing. And I think one of the things I really like about how they're integrating all of the crafting and the portals and all that stuff is I think they're really trying to take people out of the capital cities. You see that a lot in World of Warcraft, where people are just kind of standing around, and then the general chat starts turning into crap because you get all these people telling stupid Chuck Norris jokes, and telling the stupid jokes where they say anal and type, and then, shift click and the ability to paste it in there. So let's say like anal evisceration and anal aim shot. Just really stupid, immature stuff that goes on. And that is to be expected to a certain extent, but can be annoying. So I think they are trying to take a lot of players out of the capital cities and focus it on being a more social and intimate experience with your friends and with your guild and all of that. So it does look really cool. This once again, in addition to the pathing system, I've seen a lot of people saying, oh, it's just tacked on. This is not a tacked on feature. It's something that is really well integrated into the game. And as I mentioned on the podcast, I was not a big proponent of player housing in World of Warcraft. I had never experienced any type of player housing stuff. Obviously, it's not in that game, so I didn't really know anything about it, but this does look really cool, and it also gives you just an alternate path of progression as well. So you can have, in addition to your gear, you can also say, I'm going to go out and try to get this cool stuff for my house at max level as well. Let's see if there's any other stuff in relation to housing. I don't think so. I think that's pretty much it as far as housing goes. I just want to reiterate that this is one of the two features that I'm really looking forward to getting my hands on in the beta. Wink, wink, nod, nod, Carbine. Getting my hands on it and really playing around with, because this is something that, as I mentioned, I don't have any experience with, and it just looks like it's going to be a lot of fun. Alright, let me see what's next on tap. I guess I could talk about the PvP a little bit, and then I'll talk about the PvE. I am more of a PvE-oriented player. I did do PvP in World of Warcraft, but it was never really my main focus. I would really just I did a little open world PvP back when actually open world PvP happened in that game. Since it doesn't anymore because of a lot of people blame it, a lot of reasons. But I did Battlegrounds a decent amount. I would go through kind of phases where I would do a lot of PvPing. So I'm not a huge PvPer. I'm sure I'll mess around with it a little bit. They will have Arena. They will have ranked arenas, much like World of Warcraft. They have Battlegrounds, ranked Battlegrounds. They haven't talked a lot about what they're going to do with World PvP. I'm sure that it will happen. This seems to be something that a lot of people in the community feel very strongly about, is making sure that there is compelling World PvP content. And I agree with them. I was involved in the Terran Mill South Shore Tug of War, and it was a lot of fun way back when in World of Warcraft. So I do hope that they have something there that other than just totally player-driven. What they're also going to have is the war plot system as well, which that's for max-level characters from what I understand. And those are basically raid-sized PvP groups going against each other. So that's more for the really, really high-end, really hardcore PvPers, even more so than the arenas. And what it's going to be is it kind of takes a cue from the housing system, where you'll have to build onto your war plot. You can also do, and I did mention this on the podcast, you can have a raid boss, which is possible to capture raid bosses. They have not gone into detail on how that works, and obviously the raid boss won't be as strong. I'm pretty sure that you'll have to beat it up pretty significantly to get it into a point where you can actually capture the boss. One of the things that they're doing with that as well is if you lose a war plot match, your war plot actually gets destroyed, and you have to. I don't know how much you're going to have to rebuild, if you're going to have to rebuild it from the ground up. I do know that after a match, you do have to repair your war plot, and they've talked about that a little bit. It's going to kind of have an ongoing thing where it's not just like I'm just going to build up my war plot and then that's going to be it. So you could potentially, let's say if you have your war plot and then you build it up and then you keep getting your ass kicked, you could say, well, I'm not going to, since we keep losing, I'm not going to use that war plot anymore. So you could potentially change things on it after you lose. So it allows you to try a lot of different strategies. That's what I'm getting at with that. Arena, they're going to have 2v2, 3v3, 5v5. I was never a big Arena player. I played around with a little bit back in Burning Crusade. I don't really have a whole lot to say about that. One of the things they're doing that's a little different that I think is pretty cool is they're going to have a certain amount of lives. That does add a little bit of a different element to it, and it'll be interesting to see. That's something that I would be a little bit more compelled to, because I'm not a great PvP player. I definitely will at least give that a shot. And for Battlegrounds, they are, I think it starts at level 1. They will have cross-server matchmaking for PvP, for all types of PvP as well. They are talking about including an option for match with your own server. That way you'll only be playing with people in your server, and that's another thing that people seem to feel very strongly about, more so for PvE. But anyway, the Battlegrounds, they've only announced one so far. We know that there's going to be more at launch. They haven't said how many, but the Battlegrounds are going to be anywhere from 10v10 to 15 versus 15. And the only one that they've talked about so far is a capture the flag style one. And it's not just a Warsong Gulch style capture the flag. They're doing it a little bit differently. It's kind of confusing, actually. It's kind of hard to describe, but the way I understand it is they will have 2 flags in the middle of the map. Either 2 or 3. So you run up to them, you grab the flags, and then you take it back to your base. And I'm not quite sure how you score points. Maybe it's you capture all the flags on the map and then you hold it for a certain amount of time. Once you take the flag back to your base, you can get killed and you can lose it, and they can run it back to their base. So they haven't talked a whole lot about that, and I don't see anything on the Wildstar Junkies page here that at least kind of skimming over it. But they are placing seemingly a large emphasis on having really good PvP, which is something that World of Warcraft has struggled with basically forever. Class balance is really what ruins it for me, and there's always been kind of a flavor of the month class. Like for a while back in vanilla, it was rogues, and then it went on to be, I think, warlocks were the flavor of the month in Burning Crusade, and then later on it was paladins. I remember paladins were just insanely overpowered, but they've always had it seems to be one or two classes that just destroy the other faction, and you can kill them. It was possible, but it usually took a couple people to do it. So, and especially if you were undergeared or equally geared to that character, you didn't stand a chance. So the balance, that has always been a huge issue in World of Warcraft. I really, really hope that they are able to strike a better balance. I think by having less classes, that hopefully will be easier to do, as they have 6 as opposed to, I think it was 8 classes in World of Warcraft at launch. I don't remember. I do hope they really, really, really need to get the balance there, and I think one of the ways that they can do that, and it looks like they're trying to anyway, is having PvP and PvE gear separate. And they're also having PvP-specific stats. I don't know, Warcraft tried that with, I think it was Tenacity? I think that was the name of the stat. Or maybe that was a buff. Oh, what that was when you were outnumbered, it buffed your faction in Wintergrasp. Well, I can't remember the name of the stat off the top of my head. But I think they tried that in World of Warcraft, and I don't know if they introduced that as a balancing mechanism. If they did, it didn't work. Like I said, I'm not a huge PvP guy. I will definitely give it a shot, and if the balance is there, I'll probably play it a little bit more than I did in WoW, but not the biggest feature that I'm looking forward to. I'm more of a PvE guy, so we'll go ahead over to the PvE stuff, and we'll start out with the leveling. Currently, the level cap in the game is going to be 50, and zones will have a recommended level for players, and you'll kind of just go through similar to World of Warcraft style. Go up to quest hubs and might get a couple quests from there, but Wildstar isn't as quest hub driven. You do have a communication device on you. So while you're out in the field, you can pick up quests the traditional way, but you'll also be getting quests over your communication device. You'll also be able to turn in quests in the field and receive follow-up quests as well. So I think they're trying to take the emphasis away from having to run back to a quest hub over and over and over again. They also seem to be placing a big emphasis on exploration, not just having the explorer class, or path, excuse me, but there'll be dynamic quest givers out there in the zones. They move around. There will be, one of the things that they're doing is, and I'm reading this here on the Wildstar Junkies site, is they have these crystals around the zone, which are kind of low gravity crystals, and when you go near them, you can jump up on the sides of mountains and other places that you couldn't otherwise access in. There might be some quest givers or a special mob up there that's a named mob that drops a quest item, or might drop some higher level gear or whatever. That's just one of the ways that they are placing an emphasis on questing, or exploration rather. They haven't talked a lot about what the questing content is going to be, if it's just going to be kill 10 of this, a lot of fetch quests and things like that. I'm guessing it's probably not going to deviate from the standard MMO conventions too much. That's been that's been a sticking point for a lot of players, is in a lot of MMOs over the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years, what have you, is questing is just not compelling enough. And I agree. Those quests do get pretty old. I don't know of a way to get past that without turning the game into something else that wouldn't be an MMO. I don't have any solutions to that, at least in this style of MMO. And I mentioned on the podcast that's the sandbox and the theme park style MMO. And I just don't know in the theme park MMO if there's really a way to get away from that. Now, they do have what they're calling challenges, which, let's say if you're running a quest to kill 12 guys, it'll pop up and say if you complete it in X amount of time, you'll get an extra reward. Or let's say if there's a video out there and there's a quest where they have to go and defuse some mines in a minefield, and I think what popped up was, if you do that quest without taking any damage, you'll get an extra reward. So they are given a little bit more content. That's not really getting away from MMO conventions a whole lot, but at least they're making some effort to mix it up a little bit. So even if you do have a standard kill quest, it makes it a little bit more interesting. It makes you have to pay attention a little bit more. I'm a big fan of leveling, and I like leveling characters, and I think with the amount of different types of content with the paths, hopefully the questing won't be too standard. I do hope that they do try to mix it up a little bit, but I am a big fan of leveling, and I want it to be an experience that I just want to have fun doing it. I think really above all else, that's what we want out of our MMO. At least I want out of an MMO leveling experience, and I see other people on places like Wildstar Central who say the same thing. They want it to be fun and not just something that what it's become in World of Warcraft, where it's just everybody says how much of a hassle it is. And for me, as someone who likes leveling, I think it's too easy. I think it's too fast. A lot of people will say in response to that, whoa, you don't have to you take off your gear and then it'll be more challenging. Well, that's kind of an artificial roadblock. I expect the game to be well balanced around the gear that's in front of me. I shouldn't have to handicap myself to have an enjoyable experience. And I'm not just talking about heirloom gear. Even in regular gear, you can outlevel the content in the leveling zones very quickly. And that's something that really turns me off, is if I liked it back in the older WoW days where you had enough quests to complete, and there was an overarching story in the zone, and not every place had quests like that, but a lot of them did. And a lot of them weren't very good either. I think that's another thing too, is since the World of Warcraft days, the vanilla days, we've come a long way, and I really hope that Carbine isn't, I think people think that they're going to try to deliver an exact vanilla WoW clone leveling experience. They're not going to do that. I'm sure they're going to have group quests. I'm sure there are going to be world elites but they're not just going to deliver a cut-and-paste clone of World of Warcraft vanilla leveling. A lot of those zones in Vanilla WoW were not very good. Just thinking off the top of my head, I mean, Hinterlands, I hated leveling in the Hinterlands. Desolus, I didn't care much for leveling in Desolus. It was way too big of a zone. Silithius, the less said about Silithius, the better. I wasn't even a big fan of Tanarus. I always thought that zone was way too big, too. It was a very, very mixed bag. Some areas, some zones were a lot of fun to level in, others were just a chore. I think a lot of that just had to do with the inexperience of, this was the first time Blizzard had made an MMO. This was the first time a lot of people had played an MMO, and I think, like I said, it was just due to inexperience. Nobody really knew what they were doing. Okay, a couple other things about the leveling before I move on to PvE as far as dungeons and raiding goes. They will have world bosses, and each zone will have a reputation system as well. I think they're placing a bigger emphasis on attunements, so I don't know if that's going to tie into the attunement system at all, but having more reputations I don't think is a bad thing. I did always enjoy the reputation. It was a little bit of a grind, but it does kind of give you something to work towards. I do remember back in Burning Crusade having to go through the dungeons to get your rep for your keys to unlock the heroic versions of the dungeons. I didn't mind that because you only had to get up to, I believe, Honored to get, and that wasn't hard. It really wasn't hard. You're probably going to get more than halfway there just doing the quests in the dungeons and running it a couple times. So it was a little bit of a grind, but it was never really a huge hassle in my opinion. And you could even run lower, a lower version of the instance. I believe in some cases you could, to get the rep that you needed. Like, I'm pretty sure, I don't know if you could run, I think you could run the lower versions of, like, let's say, for example, you could run through the Blood Furnace and get Honor Hold rep. And I could be wrong on that. I mean, this was 6 years ago. But you would get a lot of rep from turning in quests as well. So it wasn't just a total dungeon grind. And that kind of ties into what I hope they're going to be doing for their dungeon system as well. So I'm just going to go ahead and move on to that now. So they will have instance content, max level dungeons, raids, solo instances, something that they're calling adventures, which is, it looks like more instance content. And I think I already mentioned the public quests as well, which are going to kind of just be similar to what Guild Wars 2 did. So, solo dungeons obviously are for one player. Your dungeons and veteran dungeons are 5 players. And then your raids are going to be, and this is an interesting choice that they're making, is they're going to have 20-man raids, and they're going to have 40-man raids. 40-man raids are something that no major MMO, from what I can recall, has had since World of Warcraft back in Vanilla. They got rid of them after Vanilla. Once Burning Crusade came out, they went to 25-man. I know they had 10-man raids because Karazhan was 10-man, and then I think all the other were 25-man. The progression system will go from, you'll have to clear the 20-man raids first to get to the 40-man raids. Now, I don't know if there are going to have different, like, let's say there will be a 20-man raid and then a separate 40-man raid, which will have different bosses and a different story and all that sort of stuff. I don't know if they're going to do it that way, or if the 40-man is just going to be an upgraded version of the 20-man raid. It'll have just harder bosses in the same instance. I don't know if how they're going to do it. They could do it either way. And then they could even also have just 20-man raids like they had back in old WoW with ZG, like, for players who aren't necessarily looking for the hardest of hardcore raiding experience, which is what Carbine is gearing their 40-man raids towards. Now, I was never a big raider. I didn't raid in Vanilla. The only thing I did was I did one ZG Pug instance, which was a lot of fun. We cleared it in one sitting, and I have a lot of fond memories from that raid. I still actually even have some screenshots from it. I never did any other raids in Vanilla WoW. In Burning Crusade, I did some Kara, And I think that was it. I didn't really raid much until Wrath of the Lich King, and that's when they introduced, I think that's, from what I remember, is when they introduced your normal and heroic raids. So a lot of people, you could pug the normal raids, like there were constant pugs for Naxxramas, and we would do the, whatever one was in underneath the Dragon Shrine Temple, or whatever it was called out there. And a couple other ones. We tried to do the one that was in the same area as the Nexus, with the single elite blue dragon, and we couldn't pug him at least not on my server. Maybe we were all just bads on Ghostlands. I don't know. What I'm getting at here is I was never a big raider, so I'm not that excited about the raid content. I'll probably play around with it a little bit if they introduce some that's not quite so hardcore, and I don't mean looking for a raid style. That doesn't interest me at all. I don't want some dumbed down experience that's not interesting or challenging. I want to be challenged. That's where I really hope that the 5-man dungeons are going to come into play. So that's really more what's scared to me. Especially the veteran dungeons. That sounds like something that's going to be right up my alley. So, the veteran dungeons, I mean, this is my interpretation, are going to be like what the heroic dungeons in World of Warcraft really were. What they used to be. And this might just be wishful thinking. But when the heroic mode dungeons were introduced back in Burning Crusade, they were meant to be an alternate to people who either couldn't raid or didn't want to raid. It was meant to be an alternate way to gear up your character. And some of those heroics were really damn hard, especially back then when, there were still a lot of new players coming into the game, and a lot of people still really didn't know what they were doing. So inexperience did play into a little bit. But some of them were just damn hard. Like, I don't even remember attempting to run like something like a heroic Shattered Halls. Or I always heard that the heroic Durnhold Keep one was really hard. Some of them weren't so hard. Most people could clear heroic Ramparts. We did a heroic one of, I think, Ethereal Halls. And that one, Tim's brother actually was talking shit to us before we ran that, saying, oh, you guys aren't going to clear that. There's no way. And then we went back and rubbed it in his stupid face after we did it, because he said we couldn't do it. But what I'm getting at is, the original point was that it was supposed to be an alternate progression path for gear from raids. And what it became was just another stepping stone to raids. So back in Wrath of the Lich King, nobody really ran max level normal dungeons. It was you hit level 80 and then you started running heroics. Because they did away with the attunement system with the keys as well. They were just open. I understand that they were trying to open it up to a wider audience, which is fine. I didn't mind the attunement system, like I said, but that's whatever. That's not a big deal. They were all pretty much really, really, really easy. I mean, really all you had to do was AoE the content down. I never really used volley. I was a hunter in World of Warcraft. I never really used volley before Wrath of the Lich King, and that was about the only spell that I ever used in any dungeon. Other than when we would take on a boss, and then I would just, I'd do my rotation. But it was just really simple, really just monotonous. It went from being something that was really challenging to just a stepping stone to raid. They just basically removed normal dungeons from the equation. In Burning Crusade, you might run a couple of heroics, but it wasn't really required. All you had to do was you had to go beat the Caverns of Time Black Morass to get attuned for Karazhan, and then you could just go straight to Kara. You didn't have to do any heroics. And I like that system, because like I said, for someone like me who doesn't raid, that gives me other content to do. So that's what I'm really hoping that Carbine is doing with their veteran dungeons, is providing an alternate progression path for players. So that's really just kind of my thoughts on the PvE content. I don't think I left anything out. They have said that best in slot gear will never be sold from vendors, which I think is a good thing. I'm not a huge fan of this whole token system that World of Warcraft does. I really don't like this cross-server looking for group thing. I think what happened in World of Warcraft is when the game was peaking and gaining players and whatnot, I think they opened up way too many servers. Way too many servers. I really hope Carbine is going to be a lot more careful about opening servers so that we don't run into what we have now in World of Warcraft, where you've got all these servers which are low pop, and it's especially really bad on the PvP servers, because PvP servers have always been primarily Horde dominated. And as now the player base is shrinking, you're seeing a lot of Alliance characters transferring off those servers or just stop playing altogether. And it's just getting really imbalanced. That affects PvP as well, but also affects PvE, because now you've got people on these servers who are saying, I can't run these dungeons because there's nobody for me to play with. There might be 10 people on at peak hour, and maybe 5 of them are at max level. And that's not even saying they're even good. They might just be terrible. So it's not really, you couldn't really do anything, and I understand their plight, but that's really more on Blizzard in my opinion. But to go back to what I was saying about the looking for group tool, I don't really like that. I like having a group with people from my server. I'm fine with having the tool itself, but I'm not going to be using it for cross-server. I mean, I want to know the people on my server. I do want to have that community experience, and I don't care if it takes longer. Look, I did spend a lot of time back in vanilla sitting around in Ironforge looking for one more. It happened, and it's not quite as... A lot of people do tend to really exaggerate that. Now, I was on Hellscream, which was one of the original launch servers, so maybe I just had access to a bigger player pool than some of the other servers did. But, a lot of that, people saying, oh, you'd have to sit in Ironforge for 2 hours every night, that was not always the case. Sometimes it was the case, and there were times where I said, you know what, I can't wait anymore, I'm bored, I don't want to sit around Ironforge, I'm just gonna, I'm gonna call it for the night. That happened too. But it wasn't as bad as players made it seem. And I think them having the looking for group tool just per server, you have that option, that appeals to me. Like I said, I don't want to do cross-server. I don't want to know those people. I want to know the people on my server. I want to build the community. I care about my community, my economy on my server. And also, it's created a really bad attitude in World of Warcraft, where we're just going to race through the dungeon. And, if you have to stop for any reason, then you're a bad player, and we're going to kick you from the group. And I know that that's not always the case, but a lot of times you see that now. It's just players just want to get through the dungeon. It's almost just become a hassle to run dungeons, and I want to have fun doing it. I don't want it to be a hassle. They have announced that there will be some level of dynamic content. I don't know if that's going to extend to 5-mans, but they have said that the raids will have some dynamic content. How much, we don't know what that will entail. I don't think they've gotten that far in beta yet. I think the max level cap is like in the 30s right now. So we don't know what that's going to be, how far that's going to extend in the game. But that's kind of an overview of the PvE dungeons and raiding. They will have raid attunements, by the way, so QQ more if you don't like it. I don't have a problem with it myself. Oh, let's see. Trade skills. I was never a big crafting player. I like to do gathering just because it was easier. I don't like to grind that much, and some of the trade skills were pretty ridiculous, but they are going to have some kind of mini game for crafting. I don't know what it is. They haven't really talked about it much. There's some speculation out there. I'm not really going to go into that a whole lot, but they are going to have what they're calling their circuit board crafting system too. So you'll be able to add in. It kind of basically looks like the jewel crafting system in World of Warcraft, but they're expanding on it. They're going to have something called a challenge chip, which I can only assume is something that you get from completing possibly like a dynamic event or something that's really difficult in your pathing system, which will give you higher rewards. They have a developer blog about that as well, so I'll probably check that out. And we will be talking about Wildstar in the future as well. E3 is coming up. So I'm sure they will have, I'm almost positive they've said they're going to have, more Wildstar information at E3. So we'll touch on it a little bit more. I guess I'll go ahead and end it there. There's some other stuff with the UI and all that, which sure the game will end up just being modded to hell anyway. As far as the $64,000 question seems to be, what's the payment model? We don't know. They have said it's going to be some kind of a hybrid system. What that means, we don't know. I don't think it's going to be $15 a month. I'm guessing it's probably going to be somewhere between $5 to $10 a month, and you can play the game for free, possibly if you want. But I don't know. A lot of people do seem to be opposed to free to play. I think people are more motivated to play when they pay. And I don't mind paying for a game like Wildstar. You know, if I get in the beta and I like it and really want to invest my time into it. And an MMO is an investment. It's not just a game. It really becomes something else. Because to be competitive and to really keep up and really know your class and all of that, I mean, it does take a lot of time. It's almost like having a second job. That's how I always compared World of Warcraft to, was having a second job. Which isn't for everybody. Some people only want to play it very casually, and that's fine too. I'm not in any kind of hardcore camp or, you know, screw the casuals. There's a place for them in the game as well, and my one concern about Wildstar, and I did mention this on the podcast, this will be the last thing I will mention. I know I said I was going to wrap it up, but I do think they might be stretching themselves a little too thin. I do believe that if you try to please everyone, you end up pleasing no one. If that's like I said, if that's my one concern, I just hope that they're not really stretching themselves too thin. There's going to be the community is really jaded, and there's going to be some doubt about it, but we'll see how they go. I guess that's gonna do it for me and Wildstar. I hope that this clears up any confusion if any new listeners had about Wildstar and trying to decipher my drunken ramblings from the other night. Like I said, once again, that is not representative of the normal quality of the show. We're not perfect. We do usually just kind of wing this thing. But I felt that Wildstar deserved a better cast than that. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and end it now. This is Daryl for 2G1C, Power Ups Not Included, and all that good stuff. Signing off. Thank you.